Good evening. I'm glad you've joined me tonight. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Find a comfortable position, let your shoulders soften, and allow your breath to slow. The day is behind you now. All that matters is this quiet moment. Tonight I'll be here with you, guiding your mind gently into rest. My name is Jonathan Holly, and together we'll drift into a world of mystery, calm, and sleep. You don't need to think or solve or do anything at all. Just let my voice carry you deeper into stillness. Now, let's begin our mystery story for tonight. Rain fell upon London like the slow weeping of a dying god, seeping into every crack of stone and soul alike. Detective Alaric Finch moved through the soaked labyrinth of Whitechapel with his collar turned high and his mind bowed low, as though the heavens themselves sought to press him into the gutter. He had been called to the old quarter, beyond St. Bartholomew's Gate, where a body had been found, inside the ruins of St. Audrey's Cathedral, a place spoken of only in whispers, for it was said that within those walls no sound could be heard. The constable who had found the corpse was waiting by the gate, pale and shivering, his lantern's flames stuttering in the rain. "It's a queer thing, sir," he muttered. "You'll hear the rain till you step inside. Then nothing. Not a drop. Not even your own voice." Finch offered no reply. Words had long since lost their power to comfort him. He merely nodded and crossed the threshold, boots echoing not at all upon the flagstones. The silence pressed against him like a physical weight. His breath moved in his throat, yet made no sound. The nave was littered with relics of decay, shattered pews, ivy that climbed through broken windows, and an organ at the far end that stood like a monument to rot. The corpse lay before it, a young woman dressed in white, her throat marked by a single deliberate incision. Finch knelt beside her, his face unreadable. In her hand was a rosary, its beads slick with rain or tears. He could not tell which. He examined her features by the weak light of his lamp. She looked serene, almost reverent, as if she had been praying when death took her. Upon her pale lips something dark gleamed, a residue of wax. Candle wax. But there were no candles burning here, only the great organ, silent as the grave. He turned his gaze toward it. The pipes, long and narrow, resembled the ribs of some monstrous beast. He placed a hand upon one, and it was warm, faintly and possibly warm. His pulse faltered. He leaned closer, tracing the edge of the pipe, and found there a thin streak of red. Blood. Finch recoiled, his breath quickening though unheard. The silence was suffocating now, as though the air itself had forgotten its purpose. His mind reached for logic, for explanation, but found none. And then, just as he was about to step back, a flicker of movement caught his eye. The keys of the organ depressed one by one, as if touched by invisible hands. No sound came forth, yet the motion was deliberate, rhythmic, and awful in its precision. Finch stood frozen, the lantern trembling in his grip. He could not hear it, but he could feel the music. It thrummed within his bones, like the echo of a heartbeat buried in the earth. And as he turned toward the altar, he saw that the woman's lips had parted slightly. A whisper utterly silent formed upon them. And Finch knew, with a dread beyond reason, that she was not the first to sing in this choir. The following morning brought no sun only, a gray smear of dawn over the city-sooted rooftops. Alaric Finch sat in his office at the Yard, the fog curling against the window pane like the breath of some unseen watcher. Before him lay the report, one Mary Ellison, seamstress, 24 years of age, missing for 3 days. Cause of death, exsanguination by incision to the throat. Yet the surgeon's notes puzzled him, no spatter, no pooling. The wound was made post-mortem. She had not bled where she died. Finch leaned back, weary. The silence of the cathedral still lingered in his ears, or rather the absence of sound. Even the ticking of the clock seemed muted since that night, as though his hearing had been marked. He pressed a hand to his temple. The memory of the organ keys moving of their own accord returned unbidden, and his skin prickled cold. At 7:30, the door opened and Inspector Bramwell entered ruddy-faced. Brisk, everything Finch was not. "You look as though you've been keeping company with ghosts," Bramwell said, dropping a file on the desk. "Another one." Finch's eyes lifted slowly. "Another body?" Bramwell nodded. "Found at the river, by the wharves. Same markings. And this one?" He hesitated. "Well, best you see it yourself. They took a carriage through streets slick with last night's rain." As they neared the docks, Finch felt an odd thrum beneath his ribs, a faint vibration, steady as a pulse, something that seemed to resonate from below the cobbles themselves. The constables had covered the body with a tarpaulin. When they lifted it, Finch's breath caught. The victim was a young man this time, dressed as a church verger, hands clasped together in unnatural prayer. Between his fingers was lodged a single pipe small, metallic, unmistakably torn from an organ. "Saints preserve us," Bramwell whispered. "Why an organ pipe?" Finch crouched beside the corpse, inspecting the wound at the throat. Identical, clean, ritual. The pipe had been polished recently. He looked up toward the water's edge, where the fog thickened like smoke from an unseen fire. In the distance, faint but certain, Finch thought he saw the outline of spires black against the gray, St. Audrey's Cathedral, rising from the mists, though it should have been miles away. He blinked, and it was gone. He turned to Bramwell, voice low. "These are not random killings. They are liturgical." "Meaning what?" Finch's gaze drifted back to the river, where the current whispered like a dying hymn. "Meaning," he said, "someone is trying to build a choir." And then the constable nearby called out a sound of alarm and disbelief. Finch looked down to see that the dead man's mouth had opened slightly, though no air escaped it. The body's chest rose once, faintly, as if drawing breath, and in the silence that followed, Finch felt the same pulse again, now stronger, deeper beating through the ground beneath their feet. That night, London seemed unnaturally hushed. Even the clatter of hooves upon the cobbles had grown subdued, as though the entire city were listening. Finch walked alone through narrow lanes that smelled of soot and stale wine, his lantern a trembling star amid the murk. He could not sleep, not after what he had seen at the docks. A corpse that breathed, a silence that sang. These were not matters the mind could file neatly away. He found himself once more before the gate of St. Audrey's Cathedral. The iron bars were slick with rain, cold as judgment. He hesitated only a moment before pushing them open. No constables had been stationed there. None would come near the place twice. The silence enveloped him again as soon as he crossed the threshold. Not the simple quiet of empty air, but an active stillness, predatory, immense. The nave looked unchanged, yet Finch sensed a subtle shift, as if the building itself had inhaled while no one watched. The shadows seemed deeper, the air heavier. He raised his lantern and saw that the corpse of Mary Ellison was gone. His heart lurched. The slab upon which she had lain was bare but for the impression of her body upon the dust. No drag marks, no footprints, nothing. He called out, but his voice died unmade. The cathedral swallowed it whole. He forced himself forward, every step a defiance. At the altar the organ loomed larger than before. Its pipes shimmered faintly in the lantern light, wet with condensation or perhaps with sweat. He reached out and touched one. It pulsed, not rhythmically, not like breath, but like a living thing that resented the contact. He drew his hand back sharply. Then he saw them faint carvings newly etched into the stone before the altar. Latin words, half-worn but legible enough for a man raised in the church's shadows. Vox mortuorum cantabit. The voice of the dead shall sing. A soundless chill swept through him. His father had once been a clergyman, before faith broke upon the reefs of reason. Finch remembered those sermons in candlelit chapels, the hymns rising like smoke. He had long since dismissed the notion of divine wrath, but this was no God's doing. He turned, intending to leave, when his lantern's light fell upon a figure in the upper gallery. A man, or what had once been one, dressed in the tattered remains of a choir robe. The face was pale, expressionless, and the mouth stitched shut with black thread. Finch froze. The figure raised a trembling hand and pointed toward him. The silence deepened, pressing into his skull. He felt the vibration again, that dreadful wordless note resonating in his bones. And though the man's lips could not part, Finch heard from nowhere and everywhere at once a whisper that was not a whisper. "Join us." The lantern slipped from his grasp and shattered on the stones, casting the nave into darkness. For the first time in years, Detective Alaric Finch tried to scream, but not a sound came out. Morning arrived like a pale imitation of light, the sun smothered behind layers of coal-stained cloud. Finch sat at his desk, motionless, the remnants of a sleepless night etched into his hollow eyes. His hands trembled when he tried to light his pipe. No smoke comforted him. The match fizzled into silence, as though the world itself conspired to muffle all sound. He replayed the vision again and again, the choir-robed figure, its mouth sealed with thread. The whisper, "Join us," without a whisper. He had left the cathedral stumbling, nearly blind from terror, unable to tell if he had dreamt it all or carried some part of that nightmare with him. His ears still rang with absence. A knock at the door startled him, not for the sound, but for the faint thud that somehow reached him. Bramwell entered, hat in hand, a grim cast to his ruddy face. "You look half dead, Alaric. I shouldn't wonder if that cursed church took something from you." Finch's voice rasped. "It took her body. The woman's corpse is gone." "What?" Bramwell frowned, pulling up a chair. "You mean grave robbers?" Finch shook his head. "No marks of entry, no footprints. It's as if she rose and walked away." Bramwell hesitated, studying him. "You're not one for fancies, but you've the look of a man who's seen more than a corpse vanish." Finch's gaze drifted toward the window, where fog curled like slow smoke. "I saw a man in the gallery, a choir robe." Mouth sewn shut, Bramwell crossed himself unconsciously. "Christ save us." Neither spoke for a long while. Then Finch pushed a bundle of notes across the desk sketches, maps, transcripts of parish records. The victims, he said quietly, each had ties to the church. Mary Ellison's mother sang in the parish choir before St. Audrey's closed. The verger from the river once tended that very organ. Bramwell leaned in. You think someone's hunting former members? Finch nodded slowly. Or reconstructing them. A cold silence filled the room, until Bramwell broke it with a forced laugh. We'll send men. Tear that place stone by stone if need be. Finch looked up sharply. No, let them stay clear. This isn't a place for men with mortal hearts. Bramwell studied him, then sighed. You've always carried ghosts, Alaric. Don't let this one take you whole. When the door shut behind him, Finch rose and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay an old, tarnished crucifix his father's. He had not touched it in years. Now his fingers lingered upon it, like one greeting an estranged friend. He whispered, If there is any mercy left in heaven, keep me from the song. Yet in the stillness that followed, something impossible reached him, a faint vibration beneath the floorboards, as if the city itself were humming. The same cadence as before, the rhythm of unseen keys. And when he looked at the crucifix again, the figure of Christ had cracked. The mouth was open. By the third night, Finch could no longer tell whether the silence was outside him or within. Every street, every tavern, every tick of time felt dampened, like a voice muffled under a heavy shroud. He had taken to walking long after midnight, unable to rest, haunted by the sense that something followed, an echo that never quite caught up. He wandered toward Clerkenwell, where the bell foundries slept beneath soot and rain. As he passed the narrow yard of St. Clement's Chapel, he noticed a strange sight. The tower bells stood motionless, yet the ropes swayed gently, as if stirred by invisible hands. He paused beneath them, lantern trembling, and felt that same vibration thrumming through the stones. The sacristan appeared from the shadows, an old man with clouded eyes. You shouldn't linger here, sir, he rasped. Not since they stopped tolling. Finch turned. The bells? They rang for the dead once, the man said. But last winter they went silent. Every hammer, every rope dead still. Not rusted, mind you. Just unwilling. Finch frowned. Unwilling? The man nodded. Sound's gone from this place. Like the Lord's breath's been stolen. A wind passed, and Finch could have sworn he heard felt a tone, low and deep, from somewhere beneath the ground. The old man flinched. That's it, he whispered. That's the choir under St. Audrey's. It spreads. Spreads? Finch's heart tightened. They say the choir's been growing since the old rector tried to still the organ. He said the voices of the dead had taken to it. They dragged him down through the crypt, and the silence followed. Some nights you'll feel it hum beneath your feet, like tonight. The sacristan's hand shook as he made the sign of the cross. They sing without breath, and every note steals a sound from the world above. Before Finch could question further, the church bells gave a sudden shudder. The ropes swung violently now, though no hands touched them. The clappers struck once, twice, each impact silent, each toll an absence. Yet Finch felt the force of it in his bones. The ground seemed to pulse, matching his heartbeat, or perhaps replacing it. The old man screamed, though no sound left his mouth. His eyes rolled back, his body twisting, as if seized by invisible cords. Finch lunged forward. but the lantern burst, scattering shards across the stone. In the blackness, the bells moved faster, their soundless rhythm filling the world. Then it stopped. When light finally returned, a single match, trembling in Finch's hand, the sacristan was gone. Only his robe remained, neatly folded at Finch's feet, and beside it a small scrap of parchment. Finch lifted it carefully. Upon it, written in red ink that had not yet dried, were 5 words: "The choir needs a conductor." 2 nights passed before Finch dared return to St. Audrey's. He had scarcely eaten. The city's noise seemed thinner each day, as though every breath, every cartwheel, every human cry was being drawn toward that cathedral like dust into a grave. Even the wind had begun to move without sound. Trees bent and shivered, but their leaves uttered no whisper. London was losing its voice. At dusk, a letter arrived at the yard, hand-delivered by a trembling errand boy. The envelope was wax-sealed in crimson, stamped with an emblem he did not recognize, a stylized key crossed with a broken harp. Inside was a single note, scrawled in precise, elegant hand. "Detective Finch." The music rose impatient. "The next verse is written beneath the floor of St. Audrey's. Come alone. Midnight will open what daylight denies." The keeper, Finch read it twice, then tucked it into his coat. He felt the faintest flicker of relief at the sound of the paper folding, one of the last true sounds he could still hear. At midnight, the cathedral awaited. Its ruined facade seemed almost luminous beneath the fog, every archway gleaming faintly as if traced with moonlit veins. Inside, the silence deepened until it became pressure-thick, tangible, like water pressing against his skin. He lit his lantern and stepped into the nave. The organ loomed before him, massive, eternal. But tonight, something else had changed. A faint crimson line ran across the flagstones, leading toward the altar. Finch followed it, boots whispering nothing, breath caught in the weightless air. The line ended at a square of discolored stone. He knelt, fingers trembling, and pried at the edge with his knife. The stone lifted easily, revealing a narrow stair descending into darkness. A smell rose up, iron and dust, and the faintest trace of incense long extinct. He descended, each step swallowed before it could echo. At the bottom, a vast crypt spread outward, lined with shelves of skulls. In the center stood a lectern of black wood, upon which rested a thick ledger bound in human leather. A single candle burned soundlessly beside it, and behind the lectern stood a man tall, robed, his face hidden beneath a hood. "You are late, detective," said the figure. Finch heard the voice not with his ears, but inside his skull, like the echo of his own thoughts. "You sent the letter," Finch said. "Who are you?" The man's hands moved long, pale, elegant fingers that rested upon the ledger. "I am the keeper of keys. Once I tended the music of this house when it belonged to God. Now I tend it for what remains." Finch's throat tightened. "The bodies, the choir. What have you done with them?" The keeper's hood tilted, almost kindly. "They sing. They have always sung. You merely lacked the silence to hear them." As he spoke, the skulls along the walls began to vibrate, teeth chattering faintly in unison. A low resonance filled the crypt, not heard, but felt. Finch staggered, gripping the wall for balance. When Finch awoke, he was lying upon the cathedral floor, his lantern shattered beside him. The dawn's light filtered through the cracked windows, but he could not recall climbing back from the crypt. His hands were stained with dust and blood, not his own. His throat ached as though he had screamed all night, though no sound had left him. For a long time he did not move. The silence hung so heavily that even thought felt muffled. Then slowly he sat up. Across the nave the organ stood untouched. Yet upon its keys lay something new, a single black feather, gleaming faintly despite the gray light. It pulsed with a faint rhythm, the same heartbeat he had felt beneath the city. Finch wrapped it carefully in a handkerchief. He had seen feathers like it before in relic boxes, kept by mad priests who claimed angels had once wept soot instead of light. A fallen choir, his mind whispered. He shoved the thought away. Outside, London seemed drained of life. The street vendors spoke in whispers, if at all. Church bells across the boroughs remained still. Even the ravens that haunted the tower moved in uneasy silence. Finch returned to his lodgings and poured himself a measure of gin. It tasted of dust. He opened his notebook. His handwriting wavered. Notes. The keeper claims the choir restores harmony. The soundless pulse spreads beyond the cathedral. Victims connected to church music, possibly volunteers. Each disappearance weakens the world's sound. He paused, listening. Beneath the scratching of his pen, something murmured. Not aloud, never aloud, but within the space where noise should have been. A pattern, faint but insistent. It rose and fell like chanting. He turned sharply, expecting to find someone in the room. There was only the mirror by the door, his reflection pale, haggard. Yet as he watched, his reflection did not move when he did. It raised a finger to its lips instead. Silence, it mouthed. Finch staggered back. The mirror's surface rippled, and for a heartbeat he saw not his room, but the cathedral reflected there, the dark nave, the cold organ, the robed figure standing at the altar. Then the image shattered, leaving only his fractured face staring back. He fled into the streets, clutching the black feather like a talisman. The city's silence deepened with every step. Windows shut, dogs cowered, children moved their lips without laughter. Somewhere distant, thunder rolled, but he heard nothing, only felt its weight inside his chest. By nightfall he found himself at the river's edge, staring into the black current. There, beneath the rippling surface, he saw faint lights like candles flickering in the depths. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. He knelt, heart pounding. The water vibrated softly against the stones, shaping itself into a rhythm he now recognized, the voiceless hymn of St. Audrins, the same song that throbbed beneath the earth. He whispered into the still air, his voice lost even to himself. "What are you building?" Finch could not sleep, nor could he eat, though he tried. Each night the cathedral's pulse called him, tugging at the edges of his mind. He felt it not in his ears, but in his bones, the steady rhythm of a sound that was not sound, a music composed of absence itself. He returned to St. Audrins, lantern in hand, moving through streets that seemed emptied of life. Windows stared blankly, doors gaped like mouths that refused to speak. Even the fog carried a weight now, pressing him forward toward the ruined spire. Inside, the nave had changed. The organ's pipes glistened, polished to a dark brilliance that had not been there before. On the altar lay another ledger, larger, heavier, bound with strips of leather that seemed impossibly supple. Its pages were blank. Finch frowned. A whisper or its echo drifted through the hall. The keeper appeared suddenly, as though materializing from the shadows. "You return," he said, voice inside Finch's head. "Good. You must see the heart." Finch followed him down the narrow aisle. They reached a trapdoor beneath the organ. The keeper lifted it, revealing a staircase descending into a vast, hidden chamber. The walls were lined with pipes, enormous and intricately carved, pulsing faintly like veins. In the center, a massive contraption resembling a hybrid of organ and cage rested, wires and tubes connecting to skulls mounted along the walls. "What is this?" Finch asked, horror tightening his chest. "The organ's heart," said the keeper. "Here lies the source. Every note you have felt, every absence you have heard, it flows from here. The choir does not sing above. It sings below, and it needs a conductor." The skulls rattled faintly, a rhythm so subtle it seemed almost a heartbeat. Finch noticed that some still bore traces of recent victims, the seamstress, the verger. They were not dead in the usual sense. Their mouths remained stitched, their eyes open, and their forms trembled with some suppressed life. "You can stop this," Finch whispered, though he knew the words would not reach outside himself. The keeper shook his head. "Stop? No, detective. You misunderstand. We restore what the world has lost. The living are too noisy. The dead bring harmony." A pipe shuddered violently. The skulls rattled in unison. Finch felt the pulse slam into his chest like a hammer. He staggered, nearly falling. Then he saw it, a small crimson keyhole at the base of the organ's contraption. "The conductor," the keeper said, moving toward it. "One must turn the key. Will it be you, detective? Or shall the choir wait?" Finch swallowed hard. He realized with a shiver that cut through his very soul that the choir had already chosen him. And in that moment, the ledger on the altar snapped open by itself, pages turning rapidly, writing themselves in black ink. Turn the key, or become the next note. Finch's hands trembled as he approached the organ's heart. The crimson keyhole beckoned like the eye of some unholy deity, its darkness promising both revelation and oblivion. The skulls lining the walls rattled in anticipation, their sockets glinting faintly with reflections of candlelight that seemed to exist nowhere but in his mind. He hesitated. A voice not the keeper's, but inside him whispered, "This is your choice. Your faith or your fear. Choose." His fingers hovered above the keyhole. Memories pressed in. His father's sermons, the hymns he once loved, and the stench of doubt that had hollowed his heart since youth. What had he believed in, if not the order of the world? A wind passed through the chamber, chilling him to the marrow. The skulls rattled faster, synchronizing with the pulse he had felt beneath the streets for nights on end. The ledger's pages fluttered wildly, as if impatient. Finch's throat tightened. With a resolve born from exhaustion and desperation, he inserted the key. It was unervingly warm. The moment it turned, a vibration surged through him, low, deep, ancient. The skulls rattled violently, the pipes trembled, and a wave of pressure slammed into the cathedral itself. London seemed to shiver, as though the very air had been sucked into the chamber. Finch's body convulsed with the rhythm. He wanted to cry out, but could not. The first note had been struck. Though silent, it resonated in every nerve, every bone. It was a song composed of absence and memory, of grief and devotion, and it demanded attention even from the living who could no longer hear it. The keeper's voice spoke inside Finch's mind. Well done. You have begun. Finch's vision blurred. He glimpsed the faces of the choir. Mary Ellison, the verger, the other victims, all alive and moving now, bodies pulsing with life they had not possessed before. Yet their eyes were hollow, reflecting only the rhythm of the heart. The ledger scribbled furiously on its own. Words flowed like black ink waves. The conductor holds the voice of the world. One mistake, one hesitation, and silence devours all. Finch realized with a crushing weight that he had not restored harmony, he had merged himself into it. The cathedral, the organ, the choir, the city itself, all were threads in a composition he now led, whether he willed it or not. A faint vibration reached up through the floors into the streets of London. Windows rattled, doors shuddered. The city inhaled. And yet, even as the pulse grew, Finch sensed the creeping cost. Every heartbeat of the song drained something vital from the world above. He looked at the keeper, who nodded approvingly. One note, detective, and the world is changed forever. Finch swallowed hard. And what have I done? He thought, as the first note echoed in his bones, unheard by any but himself and those who no longer breathed. Finch staggered back from the organ's heart, the vibration of the first note still thrumming through his spine. The skulls on the walls rattled in hypnotic cadence, their hollow sockets reflecting candlelight that had no source. He realized the pulse was no longer confined to the chamber. It had spread, threading into the stones of the cathedral, the very air, and somehow into the city itself. The ledger lay open at his feet, its pages quivering as if alive. Words crawled across the parchment, self-forming. The conductor must continue, or all voices shall cease. Finch's mind fought against the command. He had wanted to stop this madness, not participate. Yet the longer he lingered, the more the pulse penetrated him. It was no mere rhythm, it was comprehension. He could sense the flow of the choir, the dead synchronized in a harmony that required no sound, no breath, only obedience. He stumbled to the nave lantern swaying, and saw them, the victims, kneeling and swaying, eyes fixed on the organ. Their stitched mouths moved in silent song. The air itself seemed to vibrate in resonance with their invisible voices. Finch realized that the city outside, once alive with chatter and clamor, was now unnaturally still. People passed in silence. Horses' hooves struck cobbles without sound. London had become a muted reflection of the cathedral's pulse. Finch's thoughts spun. Could he stop it? Could he resist? Every instinct told him to flee, yet his limbs obeyed the music, carrying him toward the organ's pedals. He knelt, placing his hands upon them, and instantly the vibration intensified. He felt the voices flow into him, the absent music of the dead coursing through every nerve. A terrible understanding struck him. The choir did not need sound, it needed life. Every note exacted a toll from the living, and the conductor, unwilling or not, was now the instrument through which the harmony reached outward. The keeper appeared beside him, silent, eyes gleaming. Do you understand now, detective? The world above is deaf. It has always been deaf. But you can hear. You must hear. Finch's head throbbed. The ledger scrolled faster. The silent fugue is begun. The city will answer in time. Resistance is harmony's undoing. The choir swayed, the organ trembled. The cathedral pulsed with invisible music, and Finch, heart hammering, realized he could no longer separate himself from the composition. Somewhere deep beneath London, the first tremors of silence began to spread, and Finch understood, with a chill that cut through the marrow of his soul, that the song would never end. He had become the fugue. The nights grew longer. Finch could no longer distinguish one evening from the next. The pulse of the organ's heart now ran through him constantly, a river of absence that drowned the familiar sounds of the city. The choir's silent song had spread beyond the cathedral. He could feel it in every stone, every street, every breath of London. The living moved like shadows in its rhythm, their voices smothered before they could emerge. Finch returned to St. Audrey's again, drawn by necessity rather than courage. The nave seemed changed. The pipes of the organ glistened, black and wet, as though bleeding. The ledger lay open at the altar, pages fluttering, though there was no wind. Words formed themselves, curling in patterns of darkness. The conductor must teach the hymn. The choir must grow. Those who resist become part of the composition. He shivered. He had begun to notice subtle signs outside the cathedral, faces pale and still, mouths moving without sound, hands lifted in prayer that could not be heard. He had glimpsed children at the river's edge, lips moving to invisible chants, their eyes hollow yet attentive. The song had reached beyond the walls, and Finch was its vessel. Descending to the crypt, he saw the choir again. Mary Ellison knelt nearest the organ's heart, eyes blank but obedient. The verger's stitched lips parted slightly, yet no air passed. Still he seemed to hum in unison. Each corpse vibrated with the rhythm, bound by a harmony Finch now felt rather than imagined. The ledger scrawled more words. The conductor's hand shaped the silence. Every note taken from life returns as the song. Obey, and the world may breathe. Resist, and the world becomes still. Finch's heart raced. He realized he had taught the choir inadvertently with the first note. Now each movement of his fingers across the pedals guided the flow, spreading the hymn further. The dead obeyed without hesitation, yet the living were ensnared in its invisible grasp, unable to speak, to protest, to cry out. The keeper materialized behind him, silent as shadow. "You have learned quickly," he whispered in Finch's mind. "Soon all London will be part of the silent choir, and then the world will be ready." Finch looked at the ledger, at the corpses, at the organ. The weight of eternity pressed upon him. He could no longer tell if the pulse was within him or if he was the pulse. And as the silent hymn swept upward into the streets, he felt a dreadful clarity. He was no longer a detective. He was the conductor of a choir that heard nothing, yet demanded everything, and each note stole the world a little further from itself. Days and nights had lost meaning. Finch no longer slept. He no longer walked without the cathedral's pulse thrumming through his veins. London, outside the cathedral, had grown muted. Carriages rolled soundlessly. Vendors' cries vanished before reaching the ears of anyone, and even the wind seemed reluctant to stir. The city had become a reflection of St. Audrey's, hollow, obedient, silent. Inside the nave, the organ's pipes shimmered with a wet, black brilliance. The choir remained in the crypt, bodies trembling with invisible song. Finch could sense their compliance as if they were extensions of his own will. Yet the ledger warned him constantly, "Do not falter." Each hesitation consumes a chord from the world above. Finch pressed his hands to the pedals. The pulse intensified. The city had grown still beyond recognition. London's streets were ghostly corridors, citizens moving as if under water, lips parting in silent syllables that never reached the ears of anyone. Finch felt their absence like a weight pressing on his chest. The silent hymn had stretched beyond St. Audrey's, threading into every home, every alley, every stone. Inside the cathedral, the organ pulsed with relentless energy. Finch's hands rested on the pedals, no longer trembling but fused with the rhythm, as if his very bones had become conduits. The corpses in the crypt swayed in perfect unison, their stitched mouths moving in invisible syllables. Each movement radiated into the world, siphoning life from the living into the voiceless choir. The ledger lay open and the ink writhed in dark, slow motion. The choir requires the breath of the faithful. Each note claimed strengthens the harmony. Refusal is dissonance. Dissonance devours. Finch understood then that he was no longer merely the conductor. He had become the medium through which the song passed. The dead moved by his guidance, yes, but also by his fear, his awe. His own pulse merged with the music. Every heartbeat struck beneath the cathedral was reflected in the city above, muting sounds, twisting reality, bending the will of the living toward silent obedience. He descended to the crypt again, and the keeper appeared beside him, ghostly and unwavering. "The song grows restless," he said in Finch's mind. "You will guide them further. One mistake, and all London falls silent forever." Finch's gaze swept over the choir, the bodies of Mary Ellison, the verger and others whose identities had blurred into the ranks. He could see the faint vibrations of their souls, each moving to the invisible score. They were alive in a way that defied death, yet dead in the way only the choir could make them. A tremor ran through the cathedral, pulsing up into the streets. Finch felt it in every vein. The ledger scrawled again. The final movement approaches. Will the conductor strike the note that binds them all, or fracture the harmony? Finch pressed his hands to the pedals, feeling the organ's pulse become his own. The choir's breath, once silent, now flowed through him fully. And as he guided the invisible music, he knew with certainty that the city, the choir, and himself were now inseparable, fused into a composition that no one could hear, and no one could stop. A single thought pierced the haze of terror and awe. He would never leave St. Audrey's. He would never stop playing. The silent choir had claimed its conductor entirely, and the world above would never hear him again. The cathedral seemed to pulse with a life of its own, shadows moving along the walls even without candlelight. Finch felt the rhythm in every fiber of his being, a current that carried both terror and wonder. The ledger lay open at the altar, ink forming words of command and prophecy. The choir grows restless. Extend the hymn. Strengthen the rhythm. Obedience is the only path to harmony. Finch's hands rested upon the pedals, no longer hesitant. The silent music surged through him, binding him to the choir, binding the choir to the city, binding the city to the cathedral. He realized with a chill that he was no longer merely a guide. He was the hymn. His heartbeat, his breath, even his thoughts were now part of the composition that spread invisibly through every street and alley of London. Descending to the crypt, he found the choir in perfect formation. Mary Ellison's eyes glimmered faintly, the verger's stitched mouth quivering in silent intonation. Other bodies lined the walls in obedient symmetry. Every motion, every imperceptible gesture, reinforced the pulse that now dictated life itself. The keeper appeared beside him, a shadow among shadows. "Do you feel it?" he asked in Finch's mind. The veil of silence descending upon the world. The living have become vessels for the hymn. You are the conduit. The choice is yours. Sustain the harmony, or unravel it. Finch's thoughts churned. He understood now that resistance would not save anyone. The choir's music was beyond morality. It reshaped life according to its own inexorable logic. He could feel the toll on the living outside, the slow leaching of sound and vitality as the city adjusted to the hymn. Each note strengthened the choir, each hesitation weakened it. He pressed his hands fully upon the pedals, willing himself into the music. The organ groaned, the pipes trembled, and the cathedral itself seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the absent song. In the streets above, the living moved slower, their voices swallowed by the invisible tide. The ledger wrote again, letters forming as if alive. All voices will bow to the conductor. All life will serve the harmony. One more movement completes the veil. Finch swallowed hard, heart thrumming in sync with the pulse. The final movement approached, and with it a truth that chilled him to his marrow. Once the hymn was complete, the veil of silence would stretch across all London, and he would be bound to it forever. And in that dark anticipation, he understood with absolute clarity there could be no return. Finch felt the cathedral's pulse like a living entity, vibrating through the floor, the walls, and into the marrow of his bones. Every step he took resonated with the rhythm. Every breath harmonized with the silent hymn. He understood, now fully, that he was inseparable from the music, the conductor, not merely by choice, but by inevitability. The ledger lay open before him. Words crawled across its pages like slow, deliberate insects. The final movement nears. All must submit. The conductor alone shapes the outcome. One false note and silence consumes all. Finch's hands hovered above the pedals. He had become intimately aware of the toll the hymn took. Each key he pressed drained the life of the city above in imperceptible increments. Voices that had once filled the streets were now muted specters, mouths moving without sound. The living were instruments, bound to a score they could neither understand nor resist. Descending to the crypt, he saw the choir awaiting him. Mary Ellison knelt nearest the organ's heart, her eyes vacant, yet obedient. The verger's stitched lips quivered, as if willing themselves to release the silent melody. Other bodies lined the walls in perfect, unnerving symmetry. They were no longer merely dead, they were conduits, extensions of the hymn itself. The keeper emerged from the shadows, gliding toward Finch. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice resonating inside Finch's mind. The burden of the conductor? The song is more than music. It is dominion. The city, the choir, the pulse, they answer to you. Finch pressed his hands firmly onto the pedals. The organ groaned under the invisible weight, pipes vibrating with suppressed power. The pulse surged outward, touching every stone of London. He felt the living recoil, their vitality siphoned slowly into the hymn, reshaping the rhythm of the world above. The ledger's ink writhed. The final chord awaits. Finch swallowed hard. The culmination of the silent choir loomed, one movement, one decisive act. He realized with stark clarity the full scale of his role. He did not merely conduct the choir. He was the channel through which the world's life and silence flowed. Every heartbeat in London now beat to the rhythm he enforced. Every breath was a note, every absence a measure. The keeper's eyes glimmered from beneath his hood. "Do you hesitate, conductor?" Finch's hands shook slightly. A single misstep could unmake everything. And yet, in that precarious moment, he understood the horrifying truth. There was no turning back. The burden was his irrevocably, eternally. He exhaled, swallowed his fear, and pressed downward. The hymn surged. The silent choir rose. London itself trembled in obedience. And Finch knew he had become both the music and the silence. The pulse had become unbearable. Finch felt it in every nerve ending, a ceaseless rhythm that blurred the line between himself and the cathedral. The organ's pipes vibrated like the ribs of some colossal beast, each key a tether linking him to the choir, and, through it, to the entire city. He could no longer distinguish between conductor and composition. Descending to the crypt, the choir awaited, their bodies trembling in perfect synchronization. Mary Ellison's vacant eyes seemed to pierce him, while the verger's stitched lips moved in ghostly articulation, forming the hymn with no sound. Every corpse exuded the faint warmth of life stolen and reshaped. Finch felt a surge of horror. He had become not a savior, but a collector of the living essence, a conduit for forces that no morality could command. The ledger lay open, ink crawling across its pages. One note remains. Completion or collapse rests in your hands. The living will bow or the world falls silent forever. Finch pressed his fingers to the pedals. The pipes quivered, responding to his will, and simultaneously asserting their own. The pulse spread beyond the cathedral, threading through the city's foundations, bending streets, muting the living. He could sense their silent terror, their attempts at speech swallowed by the invisible hymn. The keeper hovered behind him. "Do you hear it fully now?" he asked. "The resonance of the damned? This is the culmination, detective. You cannot resist. You are the conduit. The living and the dead obey your hand." Finch's chest tightened. Each beat of the city's heart resonated in his own, and the thought struck him. One misstep, one hesitation, and the silent choir would not merely claim London, it would extinguish it entirely. The realization brought both dread and awe. He leaned forward, palms pressing fully onto the pedals. The cathedral shuddered. The corpses in the crypt swayed violently, their silent voices coalescing into the invisible composition. Finch could feel every missing sound from the streets above flowing into him, shaping the music, shaping reality itself. The ledger scrawled a final urgent message. "Now, strike the final chord. Complete the hymn, or all is lost." Finch's eyes met the hollow stares of the choir. Every nerve screamed, yet he knew with absolute certainty there was no turning back. He had become inseparable from the music inseparable from the city, and the city inseparable from him. He pressed the final key. The pulse exploded. The cathedral trembled. The streets of London held their collective breath, and the world waited, silent and obedient, for the last note to fully claim it. The cathedral shuddered beneath Finch's hands. The final note had been struck, yet the hymn did not end. Instead, it swelled, a wave of invisible force radiating outward, threading through every stone, every street, every heartbeat of London. Finch could feel the city bending to the rhythm of his command, lives reshaped into instruments, voices swallowed before they could emerge. He descended again into the crypt, heart hammering. The choir moved as one, bodies trembling, stitched mouths quivering in perfect, silent cadence. Mary Ellison's eyes were wide and unblinking. The verger's lips seemed poised to speak, but produced no sound. Each figure radiated a pulse of life stolen from the living above, and Finch understood fully. Every note, every gesture, every heartbeat was feeding the hymn, strengthening it, binding him and the city irrevocably. The ledger writhed under his gaze. All notes now converge. Harmony or ruin lies in your hand. One misstep and silence devours all. The keeper appeared behind him, ghostly and unwavering. "Do you feel it, detective? The crescendo of absence? This is the world remade in the choir's image. You are no longer merely the conductor. You are the hymn." Finch's fingers trembled on the pedals. Each movement sent shock waves of pulseless energy through the organ, the cathedral, and outward into London. The streets below heaved with invisible pressure. Voices of the living, once vibrant, had become spectral echoes, twisting and bending into shapes dictated by the silent choir. The ledger scrawled in frantic and human ink, "Complete the final measure. All else is unmaking." Finch realized that with the hymn's crescendo, he no longer had the power to stop it. He could only guide it, channel it, ensure that its impossible rhythm continued. To falter was to risk total annihilation, but to proceed was to damn the living to eternal silence. He pressed harder, leaning into the pedals. The cathedral vibrated with the force of the final chord. The choir in the crypt quivered violently, the pulse of their silent song flooding the world above. And Finch felt it, a sublime terror, a perfect, incomprehensible horror. He was no longer a man. He was a vessel. He was the music. He was the silence. The city held its breath and waited. Finch could no longer separate himself from the pulse. The cathedral had become a living entity. Every stone, every pipe, every shadow bound to the rhythm that now coursed through his veins. London outside moved like a ghostly reflection of the crypt, its citizens silent marionettes, their lips forming words that vanished into nothingness. He knelt before the organ's pedals, hands trembling yet fully a part of the hymn. The ledger lay open, pages turning on their own as black ink formed jagged, urgent letters. The hymn nears completion. Sustain it. Do not falter. The choir must be whole, or all is silence. Finch descended into the crypt one last time. The choir awaited, bodies swaying in perfect unison. Mary Ellison's eyes reflected nothing but rhythm. The verger's stitched lips twitched with obedience. Other faces knew victims, newly claimed lined the walls, each vibrating with life stolen and reshaped into silent song. Finch felt the magnitude of his act. He had become the nexus of all harmony, the living conduit of the voiceless. The keeper appeared, ghost-like, voice echoing in Finch's mind. Do you feel it fully, conductor? The lament of the city? You have merged with the choir. You are the instrument, the rhythm, the pulse itself. One misstep, one hesitation, and all falls into irrecoverable silence. Finch pressed down firmly on the pedals. The organ's pulse surged violently, radiating through the cathedral and into London. The streets trembled, shadows bending, the living caught in invisible currents of the hymn. He felt every heartbeat, every breath, every unspoken word of the city above echo through him, shaping the music, shaping reality itself. The ledger scrawled again. One final measure remains. Complete it, or the world becomes a tomb. Finch's chest ached with the weight of eternity. He was both conductor and note, both creator and victim. Every movement of his hands dictated the fate of countless lives, yet resistance was impossible. He exhaled, pressing the final sequence of keys. The cathedral shuddered. The choir's bodies vibrated violently, a silent force sweeping outward. Finch felt the culmination of the hymn, sublime, terrifying, and absolute. And in that instant he realized the horror of truth. The choir would never end. The city would never speak again, and he would never leave. The cathedral quaked beneath Finch's hands. The final measure approached, each pedal pressed an irreversible decree upon the city above. He felt the invisible waves of the hymn threading through every stone, every street, every heartbeat. London had become a hushed reflection of St. Audrey's, living yet voiceless, obedient yet unervingly still. He knelt at the organ, hands steady now, merged with the rhythm, inseparable from the silent music. The ledger lay open, letters forming of their own volition. The final chord awaits. Complete it. Harmony or oblivion. One act decides all. Finch descended to the crypt for the last time. The choir awaited him, their bodies taut with anticipation, stitched mouths quivering in silent articulation, vacant eyes fixed upon the organ. Mary Ellison, the verger, and others newly claimed, swayed as if suspended in a breathless wind. Every movement, every imperceptible gesture, fed the hymn, binding Finch and the city irrevocably. The keeper appeared beside him. "Do you feel it, detective? The perfection of silence? You are no longer just conductor, you are the music, the pulse, the world itself. One hesitation, one false note, and all collapses into void." Finch's fingers pressed the keys fully. The cathedral vibrated with incomprehensible force. The pulse surged outward, threading through London's streets, through every human life. The living were instruments now, their every breath, every movement shaped by the voiceless choir. The ledger wrote again, "Strike the final chord. Complete the hymn. Accept your place among the notes." Finch inhaled, feeling the totality of the music course through him, the immense weight of eternity pressing against his chest. He understood there was no return. To stop now would unmake the city. To continue meant surrendering utterly to the song. His hands moved with precision, guided by instinct and terror. The final chord struck. The cathedral shivered violently, the pipes groaning, the crypt vibrating as the choir reached perfect, silent unison. Finch felt a surge of vertigo. The world above had aligned with the hymn, reality itself bending to the pulse. And in that shattering perfection, he realized the full cost. London would never speak again. The silent choir had claimed the city, and he, its eternal conductor, would never leave St. Audrey's. The world waited utterly still. Finch sat before the organ, the cathedral trembling beneath him as the pulse of the silent choir spread through every stone, every pipe, and into the streets of London. The final chord had been struck, yet the rhythm did not cease. It expanded, threading through the city like an unseen tide, carrying with it the weight of absence, the dominion of silence. The ledger lay open, its ink moving as if alive. The hymn is complete. The conductor is bound. The choir eternal. All life shall answer the rhythm. Finch glanced at the crypt. The choir remained, bodies swaying in perfect, silent unison, stitched mouths quivering with obedience. Mary Ellison's eyes, hollow yet attentive, reflected the pulse he now carried entirely within himself. The verger and the others moved in perfect cadence, their stolen life flowing into the hymn, each motion a note in a composition no one could hear, yet all were bound to obey. The keeper appeared beside him, his form more shadow than flesh. "It is done," he whispered inside Finch's mind. "You have completed the requiem. You are no longer the man who came seeking justice. You are the conductor, the vessel, the hymn itself. There is no escape. There is no end. Finch placed his hands on the pedals, and the organ surged with invisible energy. The cathedral shuddered, and the city above responded. Doors shivered, windows rattled without sound, every heartbeat and every breath bending to the silent hymn. London was now fully a part of the choir, a vast, unspoken composition conducted through Finch alone. He realized the ultimate truth. The world above had become a stage for the choir, its living inhabitants instruments in a song of absence, and he the eternal intermediary. His own voice had vanished, his thoughts fused to the music, his will no longer entirely his own. The ledger wrote one final message. The eternal requiem begins. The conductor lives, but not as man. The choir sings forever. Finch exhaled, though no sound emerged. He pressed the pedals again. The cathedral shivered, the crypt trembled, and the silent choir rose, a perfect, inexorable harmony. The city waited in suspended breath, and Finch knew with a terrible clarity that he would never leave St. Audrey's. The silent hymn would continue endlessly, spreading through the veins of the world, and he, its eternal conductor, would bear the burden forever, a requiem with no end, and a city that would never speak again.